So first thing you want to do is remove the steering column, two E12 bolts with 5/8 backup wrench on the back. Next, take the steering column and move it out of the mounting holes. Push it over to the driver's side and out of the way so you can get access to the downpipes. Normally there's a heat shield right here, but it's missing on TJ's car, but remove it before you get to the O2 sensors. Remove the O2 sensors with the 7/8 wrench, and the gray will be the rear one. Next, remove the V-band clamps with a 13mm wrench and remove the clamps off the downpipes or get them loose. Remove the flanges off the downpipes. Whatever your hardware may be, make sure you hold backup and use a ratchet with an extension. They could be 10, 11, or 12 or 13mm. Just depends on what hardware you have. Remove this bolt holding the exhaust so you have more play with the downpipes to get them off. It's an E10. Disconnect, let me see the light. Disconnect the connectors to the rear O2 sensors and make sure you mark it for which one's which. And the rear O2 sensors will come off with the downpipe. You want to remove the driver's side downpipe first by loosening the clamp near the turbo and rotating it out nice and easy and disconnecting the connector. Alright, next remove the passenger side downpipe by loosening the clamp and working it out slowly. Next you want to drain the coolant out, and to do that you have, on this car, this particular car with an upgraded aftermarket intercooler, you have to remove the intercooler to get to the plug that's behind the driver's side end tank of the intercooler right behind here. Back at the rear downpipe that was removed, you have to remove this bracket here that's in the way for installing your rear pipe system, and later on we'll be cutting that off. While you're down here at the driver's side of the intercooler outlet, there's this little bolt on the transmission cooler over here on the back of the radiator fan. You want to undo that bolt, and there's another one on top we'll undo later. And those two bolts hold the fan in, and we'll be able to pull that out from the top later on for some of the install. Now that the intercooler is removed, there's the drain plug for the radiator. You want to remove that with the large flathead and make sure you use a nice clean bucket. And if you're going to reuse your coolant, I would suggest just getting some new coolant and basically flushing your cooling system. Just a note, the bolt that holds the bottom of the radiator fan on is a T25. Removing the rear bracket near the rear turbo, that pretty much isn't used for anything if you don't have stock downpipes. It's an E18. Best to use a short die, but we're using a long die here. So on top in the engine bay, basically you're going to remove your brake vacuum line like we just did there. Remove whatever intake you have down here to the clamps, and then remove your engine cover. And also I'm not gonna video everything, but we're gonna remove these. You want to keep all your hardware because we're gonna reuse hardware. Remove this stuff here, remove that bolt there. I think this bracket's different than OEM bracket, but just remove whatever bracket you have. I think the OEM bracket also bolts on down here to the fuel rail. And on this side, you're going to remove your one bolt here, and there's another bolt down there, and remove this bracket. There may be another one on the back side, not sure. But remove this bracket that holds the vacuum tanks on. Remove the vacuum tank lines from the coolant line. Since you already drained all your coolant, actually in this car we have to open up the coolant tank so it keeps draining out some more. You'll be able to, in a bit, undo this line. Actually I don't think I can take that one off, but you got this bolt and that bolt hold the coolant tank on, and there's a sensor at the bottom of the coolant tank, and I'll show you more after when we get to that point. Back here you want to remove the PTC heater, I think it's called. You disconnect it down here from the intake pipe and remove this PCV line with this flapper check valve, and this is pretty pain in the butt to get off. You kind of have to get little screwdrivers all the way around, or you could break it, whatever. You're not going to reuse this. So you need to take all this off from here all the way to there. All right, so we already removed this. Basically that PTC heater goes down there. You can take it off with the small screwdriver, and then this thing goes to the valve cover. You want to remove it. It has some impossible clips on it. You can just break off. You're not going to reuse this thing again. This thing is responsible for all the oil you're going to find in your turbos and intercooler and all your charge pipe. It recirculates oil from this valve cover back into the rear inlet tube and gets oil all in your system. With this new kit, you're not going to have that. And then after that, we beat on this thing and grabbed it. It has 2 bolts holding it on back here. They're impossible to get off, so you have to just crank on it and break those 2 bolts off after you've cut off the nose on the bottom side, and then with some muscle you'll be able to pull it out from the top here. So you can see the rear inlet tube. We yanked it out already. You can see the end we cut off. That's probably the minimum. We were trying to cut it off here, but the PVC cutter we had was 1 5/8 and the blade just wouldn't get all the way to the back. So I recommend getting a 2-inch or 2 1/4 or 2 1/2-inch PVC cutter that'll just cut right through it. That's definitely the easiest way. You don't really want to use Sawzall or something like that because they'll get a lot of debris in the turbo. The PVC cutter worked pretty good. It was just, I got an 1 5/8 that I got at Home Depot. It was too small. Just get at least a 2-inch or bigger on the internet. They're like 15 bucks. Alright, so there was a bolt back here. They're all 10mm right there at the bottom. There was one here in the front, and there was, I think those 2 down there were washer or nuts, and then over here there was a bolt. We removed them, and now we're unplugging hoses and going to remove the vacuum tank assembly, and then you want to unbolt the vacuum tanks off of this bracket, and we'll relocate them. It doesn't matter which hose goes to which tank. You don't have to worry about that. So we just removed the bolts off the coolant tank. Those are the only 2 holding it in, and then it just sits in a, well, this one's missing the grommet, but normally it's got a grommet in there that this little post back here sits in. And then you can see the sensor at the bottom. Unplug everything, and also we're going to unplug this line at the bottom, and then we'll show you some. So for the bottom of the coolant tank, you can see there's a little C-clip that you have to remove and take off, and then pry off the bottom hose. It can get pretty stuck, so you might need to wedge it out with the screwdriver or something. Just don't break that connector. We're going to reuse that end of the hose. Alright, so there we just took off the C-clip off it already, removed it completely, and just popped the top hose. Alright, so now we're going to pull the fan out. We disconnected the electrical connector here. Here it is, it's hanging out. It's got little tabs on both sides. We unhooked the hoses from the top here, and there's one screw here at the top. You can see it right there. It's a T25. Undo that one, and you move the lines out of the way. Once you got all that out of the way, the fan will pull right up and out. And so once you got the screw out, you can wedge the fan out. It'll catch a little bit along the way. You just got to work it out, and it just pulls right out the top. Okay, so down here on the front inlet, there's 2, you can barely see them, but there's 2 T25 bolts that you got to remove. Those are the only 2 holding on the front inlet, and then there's a bunch of little hoses and lines that you need to unhook and unsnap and move out of the way, and then that goes to the front turbo, and you just got to muscle that thing out of there, being careful on the back side here. There's a chance you may need to remove the top radiator hose to get the back end of the front inlet pipe out, but I was able to do it without that, but it was really tight. It's pretty tight down here, but if you snap all these things out of the way, if you break little plastic things on the front inlet pipe, don't worry about that. Obviously you're not reusing the front inlet pipe. Okay, so we just removed the front inlet pipe. You can see the hoses clip in there. You can break those off if it's easier. You want to make sure the hoses get on the outside of these clips while you're pulling it out. These are where the 2 screws went into the head of the engine, and you see down there we just push hoses out of the way and push the AC line out of the way, and then basically just threaded it underneath, rotated it. Once we pulled out the front of it, rotated it and pulled it out from underneath the top radiator hose there. Alright, so we just put the 335D tank in, test fitted it. we had to remove the hose off the charge pipe to maneuver the charge pipe in there. This is the ER?
It's a
STET charge pipe, and you can see the forged DV valves, and it is a really tight fit. So that's what I was telling y'all in the email, that it's a tight fit on this 335D tank with aftermarket charge pipes. This is a tight fit with the stock charge pipe, but it'll fit. Anyways, you reuse your hardware over here that you removed from the power steering bracket, and it's hanging out here somewhere, and you just bolt that back in. There's one plastic piece that goes into the body over here. It's just part of the tank. It just fits in a hole. You'll figure it out once you're putting it in. And you just have to get all the hoses from the power steering reservoir out of the way when you're putting this thing in, and then you can maneuver them back in. Okay, so we bolted up the power steering reservoir to the bracket that comes in the kit, just reusing hardware off the other brackets that we took off and when we unmounted the power steering reservoir. And we got the bolts that we used from where we unmounted the other coolant tank, and are just bolting it up here. And we got one of the spare bolts. Is it in your hand? Yeah, one of the bolts from one of the brackets. Just, you'll reuse your hardware, and you just bolt it in there to that right there through here. All right, so now we're gonna run the top coolant hose. We're gonna cut that little band off, and we're gonna basically remove this section, this skinny section, and bring that light back, and right there, remove that clamp and pull that tube out. And so that end goes into the top of the coolant tank, and the end of that goes right there. Alright, so we removed this piece off the end of the top coolant hose, and we put our little clip back in and connected it, and just went straight into the top of this radiator fitting. So this is all OEM parts being reused and OEM clamps. Okay, so this is the bottom coolant hose, and we took our cutters and cut it about 4 inches or so from the end fitting, you can see there. And this comes in your kit. It's a 5/8 line with some 5/8 bar fittings and hose clamps. And basically you'll plug one end into here and attach your hose clamp here and there, and the other end down here, and attach your hose clamps there, and you'll run the line along this AC line and zip tie it to it, and then connect it to the bottom of your coolant tank here, and make sure you put your little clip back in. Okay, so we just installed the coolant line in, as you can see here, routed it that way. Make sure your hoses have no kinks after you install them. That would be very bad. Make sure you have no kinks, and we zip tied it to that AC line there and there, routed it underneath the intercooler up pipe, and made sure it was on the outside of the AC line so it doesn't get into the pulleys, and the AC line will keep it from getting in. And then you can see the other splice there, and connected it into the bottom of the coolant tank. Okay, so we got to run the front turbo elbow, and make sure you have your T-bolt on clamp like this so that you can tighten it on after you get it in there. You want to fit it through here, and also we're gonna have to manually pull on this charge pipe and get it out of the way so we can fit our 2.5 inch aluminum pipe through here. So we're gonna have to, since we have our intercooler off, it's flexible, we're gonna have to bend it a little bit. All right, so we're underneath the car to install the elbow on the rear turbo, and basically you want your T-bolt on like this, and we're gonna put it on the turbo inlet there, and eventually we'll show you in a little bit, the T-bolt is gonna be accessible through here with an extension and a ratchet. I forgot to mention that before we put that rear turbo elbow on, to get everything to fit, we have to remove this heat shield. There's a couple bolts up there, one there, and one back here, which is actually removed already. You have the option to put it back in if you cut the heat shield off right here, basically right above where this bolt attaches, and just line across to where it doesn't get into the elbow at all. Or you can just, if you're okay with it, leave the heat shield completely off. Okay, so we have just temporarily placed the rear inlet elbow, and now we're on top of the car again. We're removing the heat shield around the windshield washer fluid filler neck to clear up some room for the 2.5-inch pipe. And then we'll run the pipe through there and try to connect it to the rear elbow, and then tighten the rear turbo clamps down. Okay, this is one of the hardest parts of the install. We got the aluminum tube worked in from the top. You have to loosen the AC line. I'll show you that in a video right after this. We got the elbow in here with the T-bolt clamp pointing on the bottom, pointing in the right way, but we haven't tightened it down. And we actually have to use a hose clamp because the clearances are too tight up top. That's okay because we're not, these are non-boosted pipes. And then we took off the V-band off the charge pipe here so we could get some room to use our hands, and with a lot of effort and patience, get that pipe inside that hose, that elbow, and tighten down that hose clamp, and then we will tighten down the clamp to the turbo on the elbow. Alright guys, this is the hardest part of the install. I've already made a couple videos here, but basically we swapped the T-bolt clamps to worm clamps, and the fitment is much better. Recommend using silicone grease or WD-40 to get that top pipe into that silicone there. You want to start the elbow down and then rotate it up and squeeze it through here. Squeeze it through here, rotate it down, put the end on the turbo first, and then rotate it up, and then bring in the pipe from the top side, and you got to make room for it unhooking the AC line. I'll show you that up top. And then you using your hands, you'll probably need to disconnect this off the turbo also, and so you can make some room to get your hand in there, and then you can run your other hand in between here, up through there, through the next to the charge pipe, so you can get your hand on the pipe up there, and work that pipe into the rear elbow. And once you have it in, tighten down that top clamp first, and then work it into the turbo and tighten down that clamp. And as you can see you have access to tighten down the hose clamp between the engine mount and the engine. Alright, on top, what I was telling y'all is see this AC line here? It clips in there. We have it unclipped, and it clips in back here. You want to get it off the clips, and also a clip up here, so that you can get it, move it up and a little bit out of the way. That gives you the extra room that you need to get that rear pipe that you can see there, and have the bend in that rear pipe clear the rear wastegate actuator. Kind of go over the top left of it, rotate it in there. You don't have to jam anything in it. It's gonna fit. You just have to make room for it to fit. So as you can see here, we're done with the rear elbow and rear pipe on the rear turbo. The rest of it's not too bad. Now on the front here, you can see that the turbo flange, for whatever reason, is like a 1/4 inch or so longer than the rear, which makes the fitment of the elbow a little better. So you're gonna have to bend this aluminum charge pipe a little bit to give yourself clearance for the 2.5-inch pipe to go here. So just grab it and bend it by hand. Just yank on it. We're about to do that now, and then run your elbow in there, and then I'll show you all more. Alright, so we ended up getting the rear elbow back on. We did use a T-bolt on the elbow to the turbo and a worm clamp on top, and now we're reinstalling the rear down pipe. Alright, so down pipes are all back in, and steering column has been reattached. So now the bottom is all buttoned up, and all that's left to do is go on the top and install the silicone hoses and vacuum tank. Alright, so last part, vacuum tank install. The lines we removed from the vacuum tanks, there was one on the end of the solenoid that goes there. So it's these that I'm holding in my hand. We pulled that one off, and we pulled the one off the end of the solenoid here, and ran the 2 lines along the valve cover back here to the tanks. And on the tank, we zip tied it to that bracket back there behind the manifold, and then run the other lines underneath the throttle body. And then you want to disconnect. What happened to those lines? Get rid of the lines. Alright, so then you have 2 lines coming off the vacuum pump, the little T right there, and they go across the top of the valve cover. It's these that I'm holding in my hand. You want to take those off, and then you're going to plug the 2 vacuum lines coming from the vacuum tank right there to that little double T. And basically the install's done. I mean, we just got to put valve cover back on, run these lines behind the engine since we have plenty of room back there now. And you got some zip ties in the kit to zip tie all this together, and a 2-inch cable organizer to organize those. And that's it. Intakes are in, filters are in, coolant tank's in. Good luck. Okay, a couple last pointers here. We didn't do it on this car right now, but this line, this 3/8 line that you get, you see this hard brake line here. There's 2 pieces. One connects down into the vacuum pump, and the other one connects in Bundy fitting into this area here. You can disconnect it and cut these hard connectors out. You just use a razor and cut it out, and you can use this line and cut it up and use those connectors and route it underneath the throttle body and get rid of this eyesore. And also over here is your here's your coolant level sensor connector. You get some wire in the kit. You need to cut it right about here and splice in some wires and run it all the way around to the other end there, the coolant tank. And underneath there, you'll go ahead and on the other end of the wire put this connector in and plug it into the bottom of the coolant tank. And then make sure you fill your coolant back in and bleed it properly. And it's buttoned up, ready to go. We'll be starting it soon.